Picture this. You're a 10-year-old girl in a wheelchair, feeling utterly defenseless as a group of boys taunts and attacks you. Just when you think help has arrived, the police side with the very bullies who hurt you. This gripping story will take you on an emotional roller coaster, with a shocking twist you won't see coming. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers from the nearby park. It was a typical summer's day, a time when kids should be outside playing and parents should be smiling at their children's laughter. Officer Marks, a seasoned 50-year-old white police officer, pulled up to the curb in his patrol car. He took a deep breath and steeled himself for the day's first call. His gaze fell upon a young black girl, no more than 10 years old, sitting in a wheelchair on the sidewalk. Her eyes were wide with fear, and her knuckles white from gripping the chair's handles. A few feet away, a white boy of the same age was standing with a group of his friends, a smirk playing on his lips. A concerned neighbor, Mr. Harris, waved him down frantically. As Mark stepped out of the car, the smirk on the boy's face grew wider, and the chuckles from his friends grew louder. The girl's eyes darted between the police officer and the group of boys, desperation etched on her face. Mr. Harris, a middle-aged black man with a deep sense of community, rushed over to Marks, recounting the disturbing events that had unfolded just moments before. "Officer, these kids were taunting her, calling her names," Mr. Harris began, his voice shaking with emotion. "Then that one," he pointed at the boy, "he started throwing rocks at her. When she tried to leave, he and his friends surrounded her, knocking her chair over. She couldn't get away, and then he just started punching her." Mark's expression hardened as he approached the boy. His hand was already reaching for his handcuffs, but something in the way the boy looked at him, something in the air, made him hesitate. The boy's friends began to murmur among themselves, their eyes flicking from the officer to the girl and back again. Marks took a deep breath and turned to the group. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. The boy's friends shuffled their feet, looking anywhere but at the officer or the girl. The boy, however, straightened his posture, his smirk never wavering. "No, sir," he said, his voice as smooth as butter. "It was all a misunderstanding. She fell out of her chair, and we were just trying to help her up. She got all upset and started yelling." The girl's eyes filled with tears as she watched the scene unfold. She knew the truth, and she knew that the officer was siding with the very people who had just terrorized her. Marks looked from the boy to the girl and then back again, his gut telling him one story, but his prejudices whispering another. Ignoring the pleas of Mr. Harris and the trembling voice of the girl, Marks made his decision. He turned to the group of white boys, his hand dropping from his belt. "All right, you kids go home. I'll take care of this." The group dispersed, casting glances over their shoulders as they retreated down the street. The girl's heart sank as Marks approached her, his expression one of accusation. "Now, young lady," he began, his voice gruff, "I need you to tell me what really happened here." Her voice was small, but it was filled with a determination that belied her size. "They did it," she said, her voice wobbling. "They pushed me over and hit me. I couldn't do anything to stop them." But Marks was already shaking his head. "Your story doesn't match theirs. You're going to have to come with me to the station." His voice was cold, his eyes unyielding. The girl looked up at him, her spirit broken, as he reached for her wrists to cuff her. It was in that moment that the sound of another patrol car pierced the air. A senior officer, Lieutenant Anderson, stepped out, his eyes scanning the scene with a critical gaze. He had seen the whole thing from his kitchen window, his day off interrupted by the commotion. The white boy's smirk faltered as Anderson marched over, his badge glinting in the sunlight. "What seems to be the problem here?" Anderson asked, his voice commanding. Marks turned to him, his own smug smile in place, ready to explain how he had handled the situation. But as the words left his mouth, Something in Anderson's expression made him pause. The senior officer's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer to Mark's. "Is that so?" he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like these boys were the ones causing trouble." The tension grew palpable as the two officers stared each other down. The girl felt a flicker of hope as she watched the exchange, her eyes never leaving Anderson's face. He had seen the truth, and she knew that he was not going to let her take the fall for someone else's hate. With a heavy sigh, Marks released her wrists. The metal handcuffs clicked open, and the girl let out a shaky breath. Anderson stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Marks. "I think we need to have a little chat," he said, his voice low and firm. "In private." The two officers moved a few feet away, their conversation hushed but heated. The girl watched them, her eyes darting between Mark's defensive stance and Anderson's authoritative presence. Mr. Harris hovered nearby, his fists clenched, ready to intervene if necessary. The boy and his friends had long since disappeared around the corner, their laughter echoing in the girl's ears. As the minutes ticked by, the neighbor's anxiety grew. He knew the stories of police officers turning a blind eye to the injustices that occurred in their own communities. He had hoped that Marks would be different, but it seemed his hope had been misplaced. Finally, Anderson turned back to the girl, his expression now one of kindness and understanding. "You're not in trouble," he assured her. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened." Subscribe now to keep enjoying the content. The girl recounted the events, her voice growing stronger with each word. The tears that had been threatening to fall now spilled down her cheeks, but she didn't look away from Anderson's eyes. She needed him to know that she was telling the truth. Anderson nodded solemnly, his jaw tightening with each detail she shared. He glanced back at Marks, who now looked uncomfortable, his earlier confidence gone. "Thank you," he said gently. "We're going to get to the bottom of this." With that, he turned to Marks, his voice firm and unyielding. "You're coming with me to the station. We need to discuss your conduct on this call." The color drained from Mark's face as he realized the gravity of the situation. His eyes darted around the neighborhood, looking for any sign of his supervisor's disapproval, but the street remained still, the only movement the swaying of the trees in the breeze. Anderson bent down to the girl's level. "I'm sorry this happened to you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I promise you, we're going to make it right." The girl nodded, her eyes shining with newfound hope. Marks looked on, his own gaze a mix of anger and regret. He knew that his actions would not go unnoticed, that he would have to face the consequences of his bias. The two officers climbed into their patrol cars, the engines rumbling to life. The girl watched as they drove away, her heart racing. The quiet of the street had been shattered, and she was left with the echoes of their conversation, the weight of what had almost happened. As the sound of the engines grew faint, she looked up at Mr. Harris, who had been standing beside her the whole time. He offered her a handkerchief, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're a brave girl," he said, his voice gentle. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl took the handkerchief, her trembling hands clutching it tightly. She knew that this was just the beginning of a long and painful process, but for now, she felt a little less alone. The sun peeked out from behind a cloud, casting a warm glow on the sidewalk where she sat today. It was a small comfort in the face of such a big world, but it was enough to keep her going. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to help our channel grow.